What's up, LinkedIn people? We are live right now, completely unprompted. We just texted each other and said, are we going to go live? Are we going to do this? So I got Rick Lynch back. What's going on, buddy?
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you.
You too. You have been on quite the tear the last week or so, 2 weeks on VAMP. And you seem to have your finger on the pulse of what's happening. You seem to be in the room sometimes when Visa's making some of these determinations of what they're doing. So what is the latest that you could tell us? As I think where you and I last left off was in Las Vegas, where a lot of things weren't included. And then you and I got on the phone, but we haven't put from my side any public information about what the current status as of today, April 17th, 2 days after tax day. What's going on with VAMP? What's included? What isn't included? What do people need to know?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I definitely am not in the room when these conversations are happening. But as you know, right, I spent 15 years as one of the founders of Verify. We innovated a lot of these technologies like CDRN and RDR. Obviously spent some time at Visa post-acquisition and got to know a lot of folks there. Now at ChargebackHelp, where I work, we're one of the leading sellers of both Epic and Verify. So we're talking to folks at Visa and MasterCard that collaborate with us on a daily basis, a weekly basis. If you go back to MRC and when the news came out at that point that it sounded like they were going to they were going to remove the exemption for RDR and CDRM from that program. Felt like it came at the 11th hour, right?
Yeah, it came about 2 hours before I jumped on stage.
Just a few weeks before they were going to go live. And then, the folks that were supposed to be there at that conference speaking about VAMP for Visa, for whatever reason, weren't there, right? And so we didn't have access to kind of the direct feedback to what was going on. I certainly would not take the credit for what had transpired since then, but our organization was part of, I think, a groundswell of all the different entities in the payments ecosystem, from acquirers, processors, ISOs, solution providers, merchants, some of the biggest merchants on the planet, all reaching out to Visa through their appropriate channels, right? Account executives or whomever they're designated to say, hey, this is a bit of a shock. This is going to have a huge impact. We'd like to talk about this. And, what I have learned is that feedback mattered. I think we were the conduit through our organization of over 50 letters from different entities. I know a lot of folks certainly reached out, without us involved. And I do know that communication went all the way up to the Visa C-level.
Interesting.
And,
that's good to hear that they actually listened.
Yeah. And to their credit, right? Their constituency pushed back, had voiced some concerns, and they didn't ignore it. They listened. They very quickly reacted within, I think, a week of that and announced, hey, you know what? We're going to extend that 90-day grace period, as they called it. We're going to extend that from July out to October, add another 90 days. Yeah. And that was the initial attempt to say, hey, we're listening. Let's let you know that we're going to give you guys as an industry some more time on this. Unofficially, as has been, I'll say, whispered, to myself, it sounds like Visa is going to reinstate the exemption for RDR and CDRM as it applies. So
that means that originally, cases we resolve with using RDR are going to be now exempted from the ratio.
I believe so. Now,
because where we left off,
yet, so
okay, because where we left off, it was fraud was not going to be exempted, non-fraud would,
right?
And then now both of them are again, right?
It sounds like that's what they're planning to do, and actually going a bit further. So the enhancement to that is I think they're going to also announce that Ethica disputes that are Visa disputes that are resolved through the Ethica product, which is a MasterCard-owned solution, is also going to be exempted. Okay. And that even goes a little bit further now than what the original concept was from what they announced a year ago. And if that does come to pass, if those whispers turn out to be true, I think that's going to satisfy a lot of the concerns around the program.
Yeah, I mean, I know me from the merchant side, like if I can resolve more through those channels, like that's what we want the services for. That's what we pay for the services for, is to have some sort of benefit from it, usually deflect or lower our chargeback rate. If I'm taking actions and using the services, but I'm not getting any real benefit, for me as a merchant, what does it really matter? Like I think we talked about it kind of when I was on the stage, like the RDR stuff I think it's like something that really matters depending on the type of riskiness that you are as a merchant. Like if you're a low risk merchant, single digit dispute rates, you might allow more disputes to come all the way in so you can fight them and have a chance there. But if you're one of the merchants that's really on the edge, trying to maximize your throughput of approvals and those sorts of things, those are services you're definitely going to want to take advantage of like right away, and if you can get real benefit from that, you can really push where you are in that field, like where you are in that number even higher, as long as you're taking advantage of the services. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think it still remains to be seen. The consternation around TC40 and monitoring TC40 versus chargeback, right? The old program was monitoring chargebacks. Now we're looking at TC40. And what we know is that a lot of TC40 cases get generated by an issuer. Let's say, for example, a $1, $2, $3, $4 transaction. It could be for an in-app purchase. It could be for a digital service, a subscription. That's a low ticket amount, and the issuer may consider it to be fraud. They may produce a TC40 case. If that ultimately doesn't get resolved through something like CDRN, RDR, Ethica, it should at that point go on to become a chargeback, right? In theory, but we know that issuing banks don't do that. They will say, this is such a small ticket, we're just going to write it off. Unless it crosses, say, $10, $15, $20 threshold, they're not going to pursue that full chargeback. And that's their prerogative. But in this potential environment where those wouldn't have been exempted, right, through resolution, you would have had a situation where TC40 cases were generated. And as the merchant, you would not be aware of that. You would not see that ultimately come through as a chargeback. You'd have no ability to dispute it, but you'd still be penalized for it.
Yeah.
Right? And so there's no kind of mitigation component for you to prevent that from being your responsibility, but you're going to get fined for it. There are also TC40 cases. I've come to learn this, right? There are subcodes for TC40. I think there's TC40 0 through 9, and I think it's A, B, C, and D.
I didn't know that. That's you're educating me right now.
Yeah, and I can send you a chart that shows
Please
it.
do.
But I think TC40 0, 1, 2, and 3, and then TC40B, those are not merchant-generated disputes, right? Those are fraud-related issues that you would consider family fraud, friendly fraud, buyer remorse. I didn't do this. There are disputes that I don't think, in my opinion, that merchants should be held accountable for. Right? They didn't cause them, and they don't have visibility.
So the issuers are categorizing that on their side right now?
What's that?
The issuers are categorizing those right now on their side?
So that's what's unclear. I don't know how consistently TC40 cases are properly subcategorized.
Yeah.
Right? It may be consistent across all issuers. I don't want to suggest that it's not. I don't know. But it's an interesting nuance to TC40 data that there are these subcategories. And then, so that then brings up the question is, well, which ones should merchants be held accountable for? Certainly, I think TC44 and above, yes, those are merchant-tied disputes. But those aren't part of the nuance of this VAMP program, at least not right now.
Yeah, because if it's in the TC40, it counts against your ratio, right? Like
they basically just have two buckets: TC40, which is fraud, and then TC15, which is not fraud. But other than that, I don't think it's more delineated. So
okay, yeah, I mean, but that's what you said too. Is like when we talked last time on the phone, was that Visa is. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you said Visa is going to take some of this time, this extended additional 90 days, and kind of like look where the thresholds are. Like, are they set in the right place? And then did you say they're going to take public comment on it so we can voice opinions for things like this?
So that's what I'm understanding is that, and probably better news than anything else is, I think that they're kind of saying, look, we want to get feedback. We're going to open this public comment period. I'm hoping we'll see something in the next week or two, a formal Visa update where they're announcing these new exemptions and also this comment period. Where I think they'll take that feedback and try to adjust things. I know that I've talked to some acquirers. Acquirers are just in the last 2 or 3 days getting access to the VERT platform. That's the Visa ecosystem.
This is where I was going next.
Risk platform.
So,
they're logging
real
in
quick,
and they're
though, it's like
seeing
when you do get like those messaging, if you see that messaging, can you make sure that you share it and then I will reshare it for you to anybody that might be listening to this that might be having questions. So
yes,
anything about a comment period. So we'll make sure that people have their ability to voice their opinion if it is so allowed.
Yeah.
But I did want to ask you, because that's what prompted this today, is you were talking about the acquirers and their access now and their opinions. And that really got the gears of my brain going. So could you tell me what's going on in acquirer land with this?
So this is where I think it's a little problematic that Visa hasn't put their update out yet, right? Because as of what we know today, those transactions that are CDR or RDR resolved are technically not exempt, right? Until they officially make that announcement. Acquirers are logging into that VERT platform and they're seeing their ratios and it's showing them well over the line.
So
right?
Everybody's over.
And at a merchant level, again, I'm not speaking for every acquirer, but at least the ones that I've talked to are seeing a much higher number of merchants than they thought would be over that line. And maybe they're kind of seeing the reality what they feared over the last few months, right? That this was going to actually put a lot of more merchants over the line than they thought. So when those exemptions are in place, and I'm not entirely clear. I don't know if anybody's clear on how they're going to apply those exemptions, right? Whether that's going to be automated systematically or whether there's going to be some self-reporting or how that's going to be done.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's not self-reporting because that'd be a little messy, but I think that number will come down again. But that might be part of what gets figured out here in the next 6 months.
So, the numbers were for the thresholds for 1.5% combined TC40, TC15 for merchants. Now
Right.
that was going to be no enforcement for the first 90 days, but now there's no enforcement until October, right?
Right.
Nothing's changed with that number, right? For merchants.
Not that I've heard, no.
And then for acquirers, it was going to be 50 basis points for that same time frame, right?
Right. Until April 26th, at which point that
Were they doing April or were they doing January on that? I've seen two different sets of things on that.
I have seen non-Visa communication that confuses those dates. So
because I was always told that it was April and April. I was always told that.
It's April.
I've been looking at like third-party sites which see January 1st. So check with your acquiring partner, everybody, because they're the ones that are going to know. But then those thresholds are still going to drop to 90 combined for merchants and 30 basis points. But this is where Visa's taking the time to evaluate that those thresholds. Because if acquirers are logging in and they're seeing all of their merchants are not in compliance, like that's pretty compelling for Visa to maybe be like, maybe we were too aggressive. Like any thoughts?
I think we're hoping. Obviously, we know they're listening, right? We know they're paying attention to us. I think obviously they're not looking to turn their business upside down. I'm assuming that they're going to work with acquirers, look at what makes sense in terms of the thresholds, because TC40 is different than chargebacks, right? So we know the chargeback threshold used to be 90 basis points.
Yeah.
I think they maybe made that logical leap of, well, if it was 90 basis points for chargebacks, let's make it 90 basis points for TC40, but let's give them a year to get there. But they may find, as they start to turn this thing on and start to monitor data, they might find that that's not the right number. And hopefully they make those adjustments.
I feel like only the more SMB size merchants never really look at their TC40, especially ones that leverage 3D Secure.
Well, I think there are some there's some minimum thresholds. So a merchant with 1 or 2 disputes a month, right? They're too small. They're not going to trigger it. I think there's a minimum threshold there for what you have to hit before you become eligible.
Yeah, it's 1,000. It's 1,000 disputes, right?
Yeah,
in a month.
Yeah.
So anybody under 1,000 disputes in 1 month, they're not exempted, or they're exempted from the VAMP program overall, right?
I believe so.
Yeah. So if I'm selling candles at my downtown boutique, I'm probably going to be fine unless I'm selling hot candles.
The problem here, though, is that what you don't want to do is you don't want to have unintended consequences, right? So if you make it too hard for a merchant to operate in a single merchant account within this program, then you're going to push them to go to that bad behavior of going to 5 or 6 or 7 different acquirers and having their volume distributed so that they don't hit that 1,000 threshold in any one account, right? And that's not necessarily a reason to have multiple accounts. There's good reason to have multiple accounts for redundancy,
Yep.
for different types of acquiring capabilities in different regions of the world.
Settlements like
But
for
you
life,
I don't
FX.
think as an industry you want to have a compliance program that pushes merchants to try and hide things, right? So that's the concern. I think that's something that they've helped encourage merchants not to do, right, with some of these programs. I don't think you want to take a step back and go that direction.
Yeah, and the fees are pretty significant too. Like for out of compliance, right? It's like $10 each dispute, right? No
That's
matter.
if they're not marked up. I mean, acquirers
Acquirers are in this to make money, I think.
Pass through fees, right? They typically have a handling fee or something like that.
Yeah. So I mean, that's where like I was always like my mind always goes with this is like, for high risk processing, like those, like high margin, high risk processing, like I don't know, maybe like let's just say cannabis and stuff like that, where it might be in their best interest to eat those fees, and those sorts of things, but they'll have to figure out like what their profit lines are on those, because that's what you're going to see is you're going to have like, if these fees for high risk processing, they're going to exist. So people are going to have to, instead of pay the 25 grand, look at is it worth it to eat these fees and pay these fees and bake it into the cost, just like a tariff, like all sorts of different things.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think if you understand the rules of the game, then you can structure your business model to work within those rules. I think a lot of the anxiety right now is the rules are changing. The thresholds may change. We're not exactly sure what that number is going to be. And that creates uncertainty, which makes it hard for people to run their business when they have uncertainty.
Yeah. I mean, we everybody, I think, is feeling that uncertainty. But, well, thank you for coming on, everybody. This was just a quick impromptu live stream. If you have questions, feel free to put questions in the comments. We will be monitoring that and doing our best to answer. There is some stuff around enumerations, like what 300,000 is going to 20%, those sorts of things. That's for carding attacks. So you should hopefully 20% I feel pretty generous. So hopefully you're stopping card enumeration attacks before they get to 20%. Hopefully you're stopping before they get to 10%. But those sorts of things. But for the most part, RDR, CDRN, back in, compelling evidence 3.0, back in to exclude things from your ratio.
And Ethica.
Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's good news there. Ethica alerts with Visa cards through Ethica alerts back in. So the sky isn't falling as much as it once was, because it was falling, but now it's not falling. Clean your mids, everybody. Just clean your mids. All right. Well, thank you, Rick. Everybody, if you have any questions, call ChargebackHelp. They can help make sense of some of these programs like the RDRs and CDRNs and all those sorts of things. They can get you all fixed up. Rick, thank you again for your time. And everybody, like I said, comment away. Bye, everybody.
Thanks.